Today we're going to just delve into this area of open data. We've been awarded some innovation funding to look at 3 data sets with the UK Data Service and then run a developer competition to get hopefully lots of exciting apps and services built using that open data. And it all sounds really easy when you hear me say it like that in 3 simple stages, but it's not. And I've also invited some friends along as well, so to make it a little bit more interesting and interactive. Not that our project isn't interesting, but it's very early. This is the first time we've actually spoken to anybody about it, so it's brand new, and it's going to run for about the next year. I've got Olivia Ely joining me. I'm going to show you a short video in a second. She's from the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, so employment data, jobs data, and we recently worked along with a few other people in the room, Graham at the back, to take their open data and run a developer competition. And I'm going to show you some of the results of that. And we're going to hear from Olivia shortly about the experience and kind of what's involved. Jonathan Raper is from Transport API, so here on the front row. Transport API, I mean, I'll let him introduce it, but this is my take on Transport API. If you take all of the open data to do with transport, so things like Heathrow Airport, trains, roads that are being dug up, that are getting in the way, and you put that together and expose it through one API that I can write an app to, that's what Transport API do. So they were, I believe, one of the ODI startups, weren't you? Yeah. So this is kind of the home of open data, in case you hadn't realised. And we'll hear from Jonathan. So one of the big success stories about what do you do with all of this data. And then Thingful is, I mean, for me, was a lovely kind of discovery, which is quite apt. So I came across them on Twitter. I thought, what is it? If you've heard of the Internet of Things, so the idea of connecting, I'm not going to say the word fridge because I'm just sick of that analogy, but everything that could be controlled using the internet or could give you information that's out there, that's the Internet of Things essentially, so devices. Thingful is a discovery engine or a search engine, so it's like the Google of Internet of Things. And I'll get Moeen to actually do you a little demo and show you what that means. But I came across it on Twitter and I just thought it was brilliant. So I got in touch, and it turns out you're, 2 minutes from where we are. So that's the power of the web, Twitter, and then finding out, oh, you're just down the road. So I'm just going to show you a short video, and then I'm going to bring Louise Corti up from the UK Data Service. We're just going to talk about why is this open data revolution happening, why is it important, why is it different, and what are we doing. This video is from Olivia's project. So this is all about careers and employment, and it'll hopefully give you a little bit of an idea about what's involved. But next I would like to introduce Louise Corti and the UK Data Service. So Louise, yes, I put your website up.
Thank you very much for coming. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes really on the data service and the importance of this challenge and actually where it came from, because that's quite important. So we're the UK Data Service. We're funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and we're there to be the front door to the most important data collections that social and economic researchers use. So although it's not strictly an academic site, many of our users are academics or postgraduates or students. And they're doing quite meaty analysis with data. So they're people who understand how to use data, can do statistical analysis. They're quite a skilled bunch of users, and that's predominantly been our kind of market. We've got about 7,000 collections, and we've been around for a long time, various branding and name changes, but we've accumulated very good relationships with government departments. We now have a concordat with ONS and Scottish and Northern Ireland government, so we get all of the major surveys coming in. We have big international data banks, and we have many other collections. So we're seen as a home for taking data. So whilst we've got the service, that's quite a robust service, and you can download data from our website. Some of our data is behind authentication, but actually anyone can register to get it, pretty much anyone. So as part of the Data Service Commissioning in 2012, the Research Councils thought that they'd leave some money behind for an innovation fund. So we had a 5-year block grant, but the idea was, well, that's 5 years. People might be coming out with really different ideas, new technologies, innovation. As you know, it just goes like this. So £1 million was put aside to do innovative things. We weren't quite sure what they were, and they could encompass anything that will benefit users of the service. So we ran a competition in a Dragon's Den style last year and asked people to come forward for £15,000. They could present an idea, and they had 3 months to do something. And then if we liked the ideas, 3 to 4 would go forward for a year's funding. So Ralph's project was one of the ones that went to Dragon's Den and gave a very slick, cool presentation. And they were quite different things presented to us, but we loved the fact that this was about open data. So it allowed us to engage with open data in the way that we really hadn't done. And it allowed us to think about delivering data via APIs and to work with the kind of apps market. And really, APIs have not been on our agenda last year, but of course they very much are now. So it's enabled us to move really very quickly into a zone that we wanted to be in, but weren't sure how to get there. So it's been fantastic to work with this project. So we have been working with data owners to select 3 data sets, which are time series data sets. I'm not going to say too much about them, but they're measuring nice things like attitudes and participation, that kind of thing. And we'll be running this challenge over the next year. That's probably all I need to say at the moment.
Do you want to take a seat on the blue chair? I'll put your website back up as well. So I wanted to ask you, Louise, why is open data suddenly in vogue or kind of the thing to be involved with?
I think it's come from many different areas, partly about opening up government and transparency, and there's been a real move to try and push as much kind of evidence out there as possible. And we've seen lots of open data, being shoved into data.gov, but many of it's spreadsheets. It's not particularly well documented. But I think we've seen people questioning that. People want access to data. They want to be able to visualize. They want to, data is just very important. And social economic data is a lot more complex. So a lot of the data that we hold are microdata. So they're telling, they're individual records about people. There's not much of that stuff out there that you can get to visualize. So I think trying to make things open will really bring in more types of users. People will be able to mash up data sets with other open sources. So for us, it's quite important, 1, to remove the barrier, but 2, just to get more of our data used to do exciting things that we would never have thought of, I think.
And do you think it's kind of, if you build it, they will come, or, because we're running a competition here as well, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, you've run a competition before, so you've got experience in kind of how to reach developers, but I think one of the things is to give some examples of what you can do. And we've got the LMI for all, and if you haven't downloaded the app, you should go and have a look, because it's a very simple way of visualizing data. And actually, I think everyone, and I know people have come today because they're interested in visualization and how you can work with data to make it more exciting. So I don't know if they would just come, but there's certainly ways of making them come, I think. I think these sources have not been available before, so it's quite exciting possibility to get hold of new interesting data sets.
So traditionally, was it mostly sort of academics or people who were really embedded in the research world, rather than perhaps kind of traditional app developers, I suppose, are a bit more like hackers, kind of, we wouldn't really be able to access, or we wouldn't know how to access it?
You probably would, but you would probably need to be able to use the software to do the analysis. So often like SPSS, data, some of these tools where you'd actually have to have the tools to analyse the microdata. So if you haven't got those skills, it's probably quite hard to make sense of the data. But now, with different possibilities and bringing in programming and scripting, you can do many different things that actually many social scientists can't do. So they're reliant on the tools and the packages that are embedded already in their software. So huge opportunities for doing really creative things that the software packages can't do, I imagine.
So kind of opening up to innovation outside, not just your traditional routes. And open data, is it as simple as pressing a switch and kind of publishing a few spreadsheets? Well,
we wish it was, but as everyone who's involved in data, I'm sure as many in this room know that it's not like that. To get data, actually to get data collected in the first place, good survey data, we've got some colleagues here from NatCen and places, we know how difficult it is. Data collection is very expensive, it's a real fine art as well, and to get data out, well documented, we have very high standards for the stuff that we bring in, it's very, very well documented, it needs to be curated over time. And then you've got the process of making open, which means doing huge disclosure risk with the owners to make sure that it's not disclosive anyway, because you're dealing with people. It's different to environmental data and metadata where you can just stream it in. So it's a real process of negotiation with owners and looking at disclosure risk and those kind of things, as well as harmonising the measures across time, because they're often collected in different ways. So it's certainly not quick and easy.
And there's also, from our discussions internally, there's also been this sort of education of the developer community, because I remember the first time you brought up weighting variables, and I sort of said I wouldn't care about that as a developer, I'd just use the API. And I think Graham as well has been kind of quite vocal in that regard, so that it's not as simple as just kind of your
No.
community meeting somebody
Yeah,
like you have to
yeah.
do a little bit of almost community management and helping people understand, don't you?
I mean, I think there's an assumption that if you throw data out there, people understand what it is, but you need to know the context of what the data are.
Yeah.
So a survey is going to underrepresent maybe young men in the survey, so you need to adjust for that when you've got the results to make sure that it's actually giving you kind of population estimates. So there's quite a lot of work to do in balancing out the samples so that when people do throw out a statistic, it's going to be a little bit more meaningful. So that's we can't just push data out and expect people to use it properly, because statistics can be very misleading. So we want to try and make sure any of the kind of findings come out of the apps actually do tally with the stuff on the national statistics sites, on your websites, to make sure they're not way out. So that kind of thing is very important.
Excellent. Well, we've got some friends today as well, so I'm going to invite Olivia, Jonathan and Moeen to come up, if you wouldn't mind.
We're a giant data warehouse of transport in this country. We were based here in the Open Data Institute for 18 months. They played a significant role in helping us get organised and grow. We're now 8 people based in Euston. As you heard there, some pretty major clients. We're up to nearly 1,000 people using the platform now. And we think that we're going to be embedded in the future into probably thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of applications, because this is 21st century digital infrastructure. And everybody, everywhere needs transport information. You're all going to need it when you leave this building. We don't want to be the apps that actually supply that to you, although we do supply, for example, Citymapper and others. We want to be that relatively unglamorous but essential back office. So that's what we do. And I've been quite heavily involved in open data and transport open data now for several years, so I'm ready to share a few of the war stories with you and to debate with the panel. Thank you very much.
So on those war stories, if I can ask you a question, I mean, what have been sort of the inflection points that have been the biggest learning factor or the biggest step change to do with open data?
Well, the state has a critical role, clearly, in transport. And so the state either owns all the transport data or has a whip hand, is a key player. Because almost all transport enjoys some sort of subsidy. And so state decisions about releasing transport have been critical.
Yeah.
So, for example, in 2010, Transport for London decided to release all of its transport data. There are now around about 100 different apps in various app stores for transport in London. Transport for London has actually spent nothing on producing great transport information, and that Wild West activity to try to do something with that transport data has produced Citymapper, for example, which is a wildly successful transport app that's now expanded all over the world. So creating access, the government decision to release that data and to release it widely have had a huge influence in actually establishing markets. And actually the other great cities of Britain are now waking up to this. Some of them have gone down a different path of actually commissioning their own apps and services, which of course can never reach the standards of brilliance that individual innovators can bring to the space. And so they're now moving over to this kind of app challenge, or to opening up the data to allow people to get access to that. Transport is kind of leading the way in open data because it's so essential to everyday life. But we will see the same sort of institutions. We're an aggregator. There are sort of distribution hierarchies now with us as an aggregator, others cross-aggregating in different areas. We do public transport, others do roadworks, others do traffic, and the sort of cross-aggregation between us in different ways. Other sectors will see this as well. So you'll see this in planning, you'll see it in energy, you'll see it in health, as the data is released. Probably the key inflection point for them in each of those areas are bold decisions by government to release the data.
And that neatly brings me on to Olivia, because you've got experience, I would imagine, of government as well. Can you just give us a sense of where you are on this journey of open data?
Yeah, so just a little bit about us. So we're the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, and we're a publicly funded body that deals with employment skills across all 4 nations. And where we're coming from with this, we're very much part of the open data government agenda, and primarily about data that informs careers advice and guidance. So we've developed a data portal called LMI for All, which brings together, thank you, Yes, the website's under development. Brings together really robust sources of national labour market information. So that can be information about earnings, skill level, occupation descriptions, projected employment for the future. And we're bringing all of that together into one data portal to be accessed via a single API, which is free to use. So as I said, the primary intention was for this data to inform careers, advice and guidance, but increasingly we're seeing other uses for it, sort of local strategic planning or colleges using it. So LMI4 is still in pilot phase. We've been working on it for a couple of years now, but it is up and running and organisations are using it in careers websites or again for college curriculum planning. And the final data portal release will be in March of next year. So it's been quite a long process, but yeah, really seeing the benefits of it at the moment.
You saying there's been quite a lot of interest recently as well, so it's almost like a sort of gathering pace.
Yeah.
How much of a challenge has it been to explain to people what you're doing and why they should use it and that you're even there?
Certainly a year ago, even when we were sort of starting to introduce the concept of this open data via an API. And it's quite a complex to explain it, particularly when, from where we're coming from, we're explaining it to the end users really. So we deal with our stakeholders, sort of colleges or government, and how they can use it. It's quite difficult to explain. That you need sort of a third party to interpret that data, and that's one of the reasons really why we ran the app challenge competition, Career Hack, earlier in the year. Really just to give to receive some examples really that we can show to our stakeholders about what can be done with the data. And also part of it was to raise awareness and also just sort of test out the data portal as we're still in pilot phase. So that was really useful for the project. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to bring in Moeen as well, who wants to do a demo. So yeah, I'm going to hand you my computer. Look after it.
Okay. So before I give you the demo, I'll give you just a bit of background on Thingful. This company has been founded by Usman Haq, and Usman was the founder of a company prior to this called Patchpay, which was probably one of the earlier data infrastructures for the Internet of Things, which was then later sold to a US company called LogMeIn. It's called Zyte. It's one of the larger data infrastructures. And he is basically an architect by education, and he was connecting remote environments, and he realized that sensors can talk to sensors, and if there's a common repository, somehow sensor data can be made available for others to see and share. And this attempt after 2007 on Thingful was basically we have reached a point in the industry evolution of Internet of Things where there are multiple silos of connected objects that are hosting data in different domains, but they're not easily searchable, they're not easily accessible, but they do exist in the public domain. So if you imagine in the early 90s, if you went to, you wanted to, there's a password here.
You can probably keep it awake while he's...
yeah, just giving a bit of a background. You got a curated view of the internet in the early 90s. So AOL showed you a walled garden view of what the internet looked like. The CompuServe was one, and Prodigy was one, and then Yahoo came along and gave you really what the web looked like because it started indexing across all of those walls. And today in the Internet of Things space, you've got many air quality networks and many temperature networks and many radiation networks, but it's very, very difficult to find the data immediately where it is. If you go to, for instance, Google and say, what's the temperature on the street, or what's the air quality here near me, you'll probably get Wikipedia articles on air quality and what this location is and what the scholarly articles are on that subject. But to get to the data source itself, you might be down to link 100 before you actually find any data sources. So Thingful is really a search engine. So you can go and say, first thing is, okay, what is air quality in, say, Manhattan? So you get a view of Manhattan, and you see all the air quality devices that we are indexing currently. So if you see this one, this is an AQICN network. And if you want to go and see the data source, it takes you directly to that page where you can say, this is my device actually. I want to claim this device because provenance is a very important part of data itself. You want to be able to know where the data is coming from. So very early stage provenance, you can say I'm near to it, well, it'll try and do a location fix on you, and maybe you'll be thousands and thousands of kilometers away. So not a very good indicator of you owning the device. But you could have a photograph. You could edit the metadata on the device with a particular thing at the source. So if you could add this in the description, maybe you have access to the data source itself. So there are ways in which we want to create some provenance information on data, because unless data can be verified where it is coming from, and you can assign some level of quality to it, it's very hard to make use of that data without the context, without the quality, without provenance. And the other thing is comparison. How do you compare data? So unless there are sources of data you can look at, it's again very, very difficult. So what we've done is we've created geolocation search. We have gone and indexed dozens of networks. So we are indexing icebergs and turtles and containers and aircrafts and all kinds of temperature sensors and air quality sensors in the world that we can publicly find. We can obviously do a lot more of this indexing, but we want to create what we've realized now is that data in itself is becoming very valuable, especially the Internet of Things data, where sensor data is being generated with some time series. And a lot of enterprises are sitting on very, very significantly large silos of data. But they're unable to, number one, discover that data, who owns what data, and whether to make use of it in any way. So in a very serendipitous conversation with the Met Office, what happened was we were meeting with them, and they said, in the built environment here in London, we can't really do wind modeling very well. And the reason why it can't be done with any accuracy is because most wind sensors are about 20 meters from the ground level. But you could very tall buildings, and the wind characteristics change significantly. And they said if there was any way they could access the wind data from the tower cranes that they see all over the city, because they have to have wind sensors in them because they're carrying heavy loads. Suddenly you get a wind reading from a height which is absolutely very accurate. But how do you do that? There's no way to discover it, and then there's no way to verify it, and then there's no way to transact in it. So we realized we need to build certain tools for enterprises to discover private data under certain rules, verify the ownership of that data, and then create a transaction that could be done. Another example I can give you is of TfL. In summertime, the road temperature, if it exceeds a certain level, certain services have to be shut down for health and safety reasons. But they can't access real-time road temperature data in London by any source. But the cars have had temperature sensors in them for the last 20 years for climate control. But the data lives and dies inside a car, doesn't go anywhere. And that data is never monetized. It's of no use to the car companies or the person who's driving the car. But there's a lot of value somebody's willing to exchange for it because it serves a certain purpose. So we realized that data search, sensor data search in the private domain, in the enterprise domain, is really the holy grail. If we can achieve that, because then principles of reciprocity kick in. If I'm sharing only monthly data with you, then you'll get to see only monthly from me. But if I'm sharing real time, I'll get to see real time from others. Just like in the credit bureau, if you're sharing a certain resolution of data, you get to see that from the other parties. And within a particular domain, rules might be different for the energy suppliers. They might share a very different level of data with each other compared to somebody else who wants to have a look in the energy data. So all of those experiments are now occurring. So we are having certain pilots up in Nottingham on the energy side. We're trying to do one with the Met Office, trying to do the wind data with the tower cranes. But we've realized that this is absolutely massive. Forget about the billions of sensors that are going to come in the next, 10, 15 years that Cisco says 50 billion or 100 billion objects. There are billions already that are installed. The data is being collected, but it's not searchable at all. And therefore, there's no way to create a exchange transaction on it. And that's what Thingful is going to be in the next 12 to 15 months. We're going to build a platform for enterprise data search and transaction management.
So ordinary people like me,
Yeah.
what the Internet of Things, how am I going to see that in my own home? Is this going to be a smart meter from the electricity company, or what am I going to start to see?
Now, it's already there in the sense you have Fitbit and Jawbone and Nike Plus for activity tracking. People wear that all the time. There's a self-quantified movement where people want to quantify every footstep. So there was an app which was done called Moves, which would just track your movement. It got sold to Google for some really big amount of money. no revenue, but just millions of people trying to use their smartphones to track themselves. Google Glass, Nest home energy meter or thermostat, and all of these devices. I'm not talking about fridges and televisions. That's nonsense. You have moves. So these are all objects that are somehow connected to internet, which are tracking a particular variable and collecting that data in some frequency and sending it to a backend. But those backends are, number one, not searchable, they're not exchangeable. So question is, okay, if activity data, if somebody is really active, if they want to share a certain resolution of the data with their health service, maybe in real time, versus maybe I'll show a monthly slice to someone if they want to give me a break on my health insurance discount.
I find it interesting though that your model is many to many, which is a slightly different model from the one we've got, which is sort of one to many.
Yes.
And there's some monetization options that we have on one to many that many to many may not have, and it's possible that you may create many private communities that don't share in the public realm.
Right.
Is there a way to also make that data, driven out? Because I think you may need that for monetization reasons, if not.
Yes, there are two sort of.
If you just
points
swap data,
Yes, 2 points I want to make. First one is because we are not aggregating data, we are just pointing at it. That's why we can't have a one-to-many sort of relationship. We are not bringing all the data in. We are just pointing to it. And the rules engine will probably be more like a service that you can use to extract value from data sets wherever they reside.
But surely you're going to have to probe that data in
Yes.
some way to understand its quality.
Yes.
Because I see, I think you can only exist in this brokerage space if you add some value. That's why I was talking about value in my video there. It's because you have to do something.
Yes.
Because it's open upstream.
Yes.
And in effect, it has to be open downstream. Because you can't really, close the data once it's open. Because people, clearly they don't want to do that.
And we've realized that businesses are basically collection of consumers in a very strange way, because they're basically, in the end of the day, consumers are generating what the businesses do, and then the businesses are aggregates of consumers. And we see a lot of fragmentation and almost a disruption, I wouldn't call it opportunity, but some level of disruption in the way the web is currently monetized. The very large aggregators like Google and Facebook are sitting in the center, and they have all the data and they monetize and they give services free, so you are the product. That's why you get Gmail free, that's why you get Google Maps free and you get Facebook free, because you are the product. But I think IoT is going to change that somehow. We feel that. It's almost apparent to us because the nature of data probing is very different. It's your heartbeat, it's your footstep. It's whether you're in your house or not, whether you've turned on the energy or it's turned off. So the nature and pervasiveness of data is very, very different. Whether people are able to, again, have more control in terms of what they want to release and whether they can participate in the monetization, all of those possibilities might come up.
But I think you're going to have to be more actively engaged to monetize your role in the ecosystem than simply pointing at it. I think you're going to have to quality assure it in some way, because otherwise, why would people come to you?
Yes.
I mean, people like Citymapper and Moves have no revenues because their exit is to be bought by
somebody
Apple.
else. Yeah.
That's why they don't have any revenues, because that's what their exit will be. But as an aggregator or a broker, you have to earn a crust by doing something.
So that's exactly what we did. I absolutely agree. So we had to come up with some sort of data quality assessment ranking methodology, and it turns out ranking web pages is very easy because you're looking for a search term which matches with the number of words, the kind of words that appear in a particular document, and you're looking for the top result. But when you look at IoT devices, the assessment of quality is a very amorphous thing, because you're willing to sometimes trade off very high quality data which is away from you compared to something which is low quality but near you, because location is very important. So you don't want something very accurate which is 3 miles away. You want something which is right next to you. And right next to you might not be very good but still more relevant to you. So searching and ranking and assessing the value of data is a very different proposition from ranking web pages. So we worked on an algorithm that we finally filed US patents for instance, to do exactly that kind of thing. So I'm taking too much bandwidth, sorry.
Can I ask
I think
just a
Louise
quick
has got
question about sustainability of these sources, curation, quality is an obvious thing, but how are you, I mean, they might just disappear at any minute. How do you know how sustainable they will be? And is there a history? Can we go back and look at the last year of the footsteps, or how does that work?
So that's another aspect which takes into account when we produce a result in terms of ranking it. You're looking for collection of devices, not looking for the top result. But recency is obviously one of the things we look at. But then you have to think about sensor data, because it could be just a trigger, which is just going off every time something happens. It's event-based. You can't compare it with something which is always real time. So to make all of those assessments is not an easy problem to crack. But you do realize that in public domain, sometimes data becomes, if you go to Thingful, you will see a line of dots that runs through the prime meridian. And it took us a while to figure out what that was. It was all of those devices which did not have their location put in properly. So it was giving a default location on the prime meridian. So again, to your point, yes, but that's public data, and that's why quality matters. And assessment of quality is a very difficult.
I think though that you should try to pull some sort of stunt like you need to actually archive that data. To be honest, you need to say to them, if you let us have it, we'll make it indexable and available back to you for free, and also you can scale it out to other people, because I think that otherwise, what the value that you're bringing, is going to be consistently, hard to sell. I mean, I've now spent several years trying to sell data to people, and you have to have some
services that are built on. Yes. So notification is a service I didn't get an opportunity to show you. We're building we have a watch list now. For instance, you want to watch certain devices, and it gives you an alert-based notification when the value changes. So for instance, we realize that a lot of bike journeys take place, and we are basically indexing all the Boris bikes in London and other bike share schemes as well. And people want to see the air quality, they want to see the temperature, they want to see something around weather, the status of the bike share near them, status of the bike share where they're getting. So some journey planning can occur. So we created a notification system called the watch list. So it basically sends something out to you in an email, which creates a recipe for you, almost like IFFT, but different, which is linked to the public data.
I'm just going to move on slightly. Sorry. That's all right. I'm interested in this area of curation, Olivia. So you've got a lot of data, I think some of it as well as kind of jobs data, as well as data that traditionally has been collected by government. Mm-hmm. How do you go about making sure that that data is consistent, it's of high quality, and your sort of role as a curator in that?
So there's data there from the Office for National Statistics, our own data. We carry out an employer skills survey within the UK Commission as well, and from the Higher Education Statistics Authority. So there's a few different sources. For LMI for All, there's probably 3 main criteria. So one of those is the quality, and to ensure that it's national. So to make sure that that data covers all of the 4 nations within the UK. To ensure that it's always organised around the same framework. So we organise all of the data around occupations. So everything's searchable by occupation. It's all around standard occupational classification codes. So that's one of the key criteria as well. So those 2 are the main criteria, and then originally the project was informed by the need to inform careers guidance, and for that we take a lot of our steer from our developers at the Institute for Employment Research, who carry out a lot of the data development work. So the main thing is that we need it to be national, and that it needs to be organised around stock code so that everything can be accessed in the same way.
And if you don't mind me asking, what was the kind of original decision behind building this? It's been a lot of work, hasn't it? It's been 2 years at least work, and it's still ongoing. What was the original thinking? Why did somebody decide to do it?
Originally this was about, so we carry out a lot of research within the UK Commission for Employment Skills, and are aware of a lot of this really useful data that is out there but really can't be accessed by individuals. And knowing how much the data that we work with and the data that we collect could really help to inform careers advice for young people. And so seeing that opportunity, and then carried out a feasibility study to see whether it would even be possible, and that was a couple of years ago. Having worked so much with data ourselves and being aware of what's out there and making sure that we can ensure people reuse that data and it's really accessible for everyone.
So I'm going to open up for questions as well. If anybody's got a question, just stick your hand up or nod at me, throw something at me. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. So Louise, based on what you've heard here, there's been some quite radically different not views of data, but I mean, you've got kind of crowdsourced data almost, and then the issue of curation and quality. You've got trusted data sources, which I guess is more what you're used to. What sort of is your
I
reflection?
haven't heard anything scary. I mean, everything is really good because we all need to think about provenance, context, all those things always come up. You can't just grab data and assume it's of quality. So describing where it's come from, knowing that it's going to be there, if you're pointing to it, your eye's not going to disappear, so sustainability is important. Actually, history of data with the same measures so you can track, you can look at change over time is really important as well, and I do think a lot of the sources will benefit from being able to go back, over a period and forward as well in the same way. So they're all the same kinds of issues we're dealing with. That there's similar measures, comparability, harmonisation.
And as you mentioned yourself about ensuring that there's really good documentation, that's another thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that we do as well is to ensure that there's really clear documentation for all of the data sets, because they can be really difficult to use, whoever you are, and really difficult to
But that's one of the reasons I think why we've got to understand that this hierarchy of data distribution needs to exist and needs to be created. So it's all very well government opening a door saying, here's a load of very complicated, difficult, badly documented, inaccurate, data, which is coming at you incidentally at a huge rate of knots. If it's a stream of data. It's all very well on doing that, but individual app developers and certainly individual citizens cannot consume that data. So there has to be something between those two groups, and that's where there has to be some players in this distribution hierarchy, and that's where we, I think, effectively sit, and we've got different models about how we play in that space and what we do in that space.
In a sense, all three of you.
Well, all three. In fact, though, some of it, you're a data producer and distributor. In our role, what's crucial, what we give back to the state is validation, because the state consumes the data we produce. So, for example, we supply data to Transport for London. We supply data back to them. It's the 21st century equivalent of sending coals to Newcastle, because they produce the data, but we give it back to them for a particular aspect of their business, because they can't produce that particular type of data themselves, or they have. So
it's been cleaned, curated, checked, and that's the service that you're providing.
That's right. So we do that, and then we find out what it is that the end users want, what particular feature of the data, what's the most important feature of the data, and we supply that, we amplify that, we scale it. So I think the thing that's got to develop, people often say, open data, why is it not happening more quickly? Why are there not more things that we can touch and smell and feel affecting our daily life? And the reason is, this whole middle territory has got to be populated. And investors have got to understand this, so that they're willing to give money to startups. We've got to build the models, we've got to build the capabilities and the capacities. If you look at things like, some of you will have like eBay on your phone or something. How do you think that 700,000, 3 million concurrent users can all act together in a common trading marketplace? That skill set does not grow on trees. There's no book that tells you how to scale that. We've got up to sort of 2 million hits a day or something like that on our website. And at various stages we've had to learn very hard lessons by experiment, by hiring people, how to handle very, very large data sets at low latency, 24/7 with no downtime. So there's a lot of learning as well in this middle ground that's got to take place.
So have you been making certain decisions about the data? Have you been approximating and so it's almost data upon data in order to enable these high kind of frequency transactions now?
Yeah, because a lot of the data services that are out there are actually legacy, deep legacy. National Rail's services are based on a 1970s mainframe, which nobody dares touch.
It's like their trains, isn't it?
Well, I was going to make that point. Actually,
Sorry.
Still on my point. But that service is called Trust, which lies beneath all of the train service information, is very long in the tooth, and so all sorts of things have been bolted onto that, sellotaped into it, because no one, actually in 2 or 3 years' time, they are going to replace it with a new service, but for the time being, it's still all connected up to that original service, and that doesn't know about a departure board. There's no concept of a departure board in that legacy system. It's simply a system that has lists of trains going from A to B. And you have to do massive cross-referencing in real time between stations and vehicles and schedules. None of those things use the same referencing systems, and so there's a very considerable data management task to just produce a departure board saying how many minutes late something is going to be. And we got into a very interesting debate with National Rail Inquiries, because they would like to have one version of the truth for the rail industry, their version of the truth, which is sanitised in various ways. And we are trying to get access to 100% of all the same sources so that we can produce a better version of the truth, or we can strive to produce a better version of the truth, at least a different version of the truth that can be compared and contrasted. And that's very, very challenging, because they don't want to open up certain types of information, because it will put them under more competitive pressure, put them under more regulatory pressure. So also I think people should get the sense that there's still a lot of fighting going on. These are the 21st century data wars. You're seeing it now breaking over you in a kind of slow-mo sense. And there's a lot more fighting to be done to actually get a lot of these data sets out into the public realm, where they produce services that actually tell you the truth, as opposed to a curated monopolist's perspective on the world. So imagine, we have people like the Office for National Statistics that play, for example, a key role in employment, in making sure that the employment data is correct. They need to enable their quality checking procedures and their quality of their data to propagate all the way down the chain, all the way to the end of the process. The same has been true in crime data, because what happens if the aggregators then, for some reason, because they have a commercial interest in doing so, want to tell a story that isn't true, or wouldn't stand up to scrutiny?
I actually meant to ask you a question, Louise, especially when you talk about social data, because sensor data is very sanitized. It's being generated by a machine, which is reading off something and then throwing it off. But when you have questionnaires, and you're asking questions about people's demographics and their behavior, it's very valuable data. But I was confronted with this issue yesterday when I was talking to car OEMs, supposedly, and I was quoting research to them and saying this is what the end customer is looking for from the car manufacturers. And they said, well, you have to go into the questionnaire and you will find out that the end customer didn't even understand what the question was. Do they really understand what diagnostics and safety means? And if you couch the question differently or ask it differently, you'll get different responses. So how do you get to the heart of the matter by being not as sanitized as a sensor, but close to being as objective as possible?
We have many experts in the room, and survey methodology is a whole area of research in itself. So there's ways of asking questions, tried and tested harmonised questions that all the government surveys will ask in a routine way that are not loaded questions. So there's a huge amount of practice around the world on how you do this stuff. Even though you might not be aware of it, it's very geeky and quite scientific. So the art of asking questions in social surveys is an art, but it's not a dark art at all, it's quite open. We have to deal with non-response. If we don't get young men answering, we have to then use weights to adjust for that. So there's a lot done to survey data to make it reliable and scalable. But I just wanted to add that really the social science world's changing a lot, and biz have put millions of pounds into big data. And it's on all of our horizons now, and it's come to the social sciences in the last year, but we're all picking up the models of climate science modelling, CERN Hadron Collider modelling, and a lot of the models being built, for example, like smart city data, are using CERN environments to actually build huge data warehouses and query data in that way. So a lot of thinking from the sciences, natural sciences, is coming to social science, and I think the next year or so we're going to see some huge areas of real progress in things like smart cities, in things like consumer data, where we're going to have a lot more data warehousing. And obviously with us, it's privacy that's the issue, because we're normally dealing with people. So we have this whole issue of privacy and digital footprints, and how we can look at, disclosure risk when you merge sources together. So it's
So that's like predictive modeling also?
Yeah, predictive modeling or network modeling, or everyone wants to use social media data because it's quite good for looking at how people behave. So there's many data sources out there, and we have the challenge of trying to build the right infrastructures for academics and students who want to use that, because generally they can't afford to purchase sources. So we have to think about different models for for providing access to for academia.
I'll test the panel quick. Are there any questions, by the way? Do stick your hand up if you've got one. Mashups. So it's like my stock phrase. You heard it in the video. I'm obsessed with this idea that I can take some of Olivia's data and mash it up with something you're doing on Internet of Things and get something interesting out of it. Have any of you come across something interesting anecdotally that you can talk about that perhaps wouldn't have happened if this data hadn't been opened up in the first place? Tricky question.
Performance information we have a number of performance indicator dashboards for the performance of transportation, and that can only see the light of day if you're able to compare service standards and the observed behaviour of transport networks or services, and they produce very inconvenient truths for transportation networks, because it turns out that actually transport networks have various service standards which they don't ever meet, ever, and so everybody is sort of in denial about that. But when the harsh facts are out in the outside world, then actually the only conclusion you can draw to is that we have to understand that we can't achieve certain things. We have to actually be less ambitious. I mean, I'm inspired by the fact that a few years ago in Switzerland they actually reduced the speeds of the trains and and lengthened the journey times so that they could be more reliable, so they could raise their reliability level, because they actually decided that reliability and being able to always connect between trains and so on was more important than a few minutes shaved off journey time. So one of the things the counterintuitive things that happened is that putting performance indications out there have indicated, for example, there are some trains on the network that are never, ever, ever, never on time. They're always late. Therefore, actually, they take longer than anyone ever thinks. So why not let's just, deal with the reality of that. So that's one of the things I think we've learned.
I had one example which is about some work going on with academia and the police to look at predicting riots. So they looked at the last riot, they followed in the areas it was social media, mining for various words and terms, looked at locations, looked at police data, and they're doing quite a lot to try and map how you predict when a riot's going to happen. So that kind of data, when you're looking at different sources and putting them together, can be quite interesting. You'd have to get ready for it and have things that will detect whether it's going to, what the flags are to say a riot's about to happen.
It's almost like an earthquake.
Yeah, it's almost like a prediction, but it's very interesting.
It's those young men that you couldn't find in your survey earlier. That's probably starting it.
Yeah.
What about your data, Olivia? What's it being used for that's perhaps you hadn't first thought of?
I think intentionally it was for careers guidance, and we are seeing a few other organisations using it for different purposes. But in terms of mashups, I think that's one of the values of LMI for All, really, and that this data is really consistent and robust, and it provides really good, solid, quality information. But on its own, it can be a little bit dry. So it really needs to be presented in an engaging way or used alongside other data. So we might say alongside local data that's very specific to a local area for careers purposes or to understand the local labour market, or some of our users use it alongside more qualitative information, so careers videos or stories, to really put some context around that data. And I think that's when LMI for All is used at its best, really, when it's combined or mashed with other data sources.
Brilliant. Okay, well, if you want to follow any of these projects, I've put some Twitter handles on there, but if you're not into Twitter for some reason, I can't imagine why you wouldn't be, because it's the cool thing to do, you've got the UK Data Service who've organised this, so thanks to Louise. LMI for All is part of the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, so you can find Olivia's work there. Transportapi.net, is it? Or .com. It's got the .com. Transportapi.com. We are at challenge.net, and Thingful.net is also useful to have a play with for Moeen's work. We've got some drinks and nibbles, I think, haven't we?
Drinks are coming in a minute.
They're coming in a minute. So we are going to be around, but thank you for coming. If you have got any questions, then just grab one of us and ask. Thank you very much.
It's here to be informal as well, to chat and talk to us.
Thank you.